Cool. All right, we're on. Hey, Aidan, how you going?
Good. Welcome back.
Yes, thank you. It's been 2 weeks and it feels like forever.
Good to have you back. We obviously had Alex Lehman back last week chatting about the markets, which was a nice recap for April, but happy to
Yes.
have our fearless leader back in the hosting seat. So
Oh no,
welcome back.
putting me on the spot now. But yeah, welcome everyone. No, it is good to be back. Really keen to get stuck into another topic today, both of which are we're really proud of in terms of how we've been able to progress some of these concepts in terms of signals going towards customers and so forth. But we'll get stuck into that in just a moment while we wait for people to come on board. I did also want to thank everyone for the feedback and the questions and some of the inquiries that are coming through our on the spot email. It's been really good to receive some of those, and it's really positive that some of the messaging that we're communicating through this forum is reaching, is starting to connect with the industry, and that's showing through some of the feedback and comments that we're getting. So thank you very much. So Aidan, how did last week go in terms of what was covered, and maybe just make a connection to today's topic?
Yeah, so I would certainly sort of echo that sentiment. We had really some good engagement through both the poll questions and in the chat and the questions section last week. So that was really fantastic to see, with different people sharing their ideas about what we're driving the wholesale market, be it the spot prices and the forward market. And we did get a bit of a nice segue there, a question around, well, what does the spot market matter for? And I suppose for many end users, that is a fair question to ask. But here at Flow Power, obviously, we do things a little bit differently, and our customers are connected to the wholesale market, as I mentioned last week. So this week we'll take a look at how time of use consumption by customers, how that influences their electricity retail price, and how they can obviously change behaviour and optimize their behaviour to take value out of what's happening in the wholesale market. Certainly core to the Flow Power model.
Yeah, absolutely, and I want to echo that, because yeah, the PEA, which we'll be going in through in quite detail today, as you say, is core to our retail structure, and is connected to almost everything that we do as a retailer and as an energy management company. And so, yeah, we're quite excited to get stuck into that. Before we do, though, there is one comment that has come through over the last couple of weeks, which is to bring on more female presenters and female guests. And I just want to acknowledge that because we are totally supportive of bringing in more female guests on the spot, and we will be bringing in female guests. One of our senior advisors in the business next week to also talk about a new topic there. So we are hearing you. Sometimes trying to keep up with a weekly agenda can be a little bit difficult to stick to a certain topic and try to get people in place. But yes, we are very much focused on addressing a lot of those comments that do come through. And in saying that as well, I also want to acknowledge Laura, who behind the scenes has been able to really put all this together for us in our marketing team. So Laura, if I'm sure you're hearing this at the moment, thank you very much for that. But yeah, thank you also to all the others that have raised these questions and comments. And yes, we will be acknowledging that over the coming weeks. Okay, so maybe Aidan, could you kick us off and yeah, just give us a quick overview on what we'll be covering today, as well as maybe the first poll.
Yeah, certainly. So back to the trusty matrix that we've looked at in the last few weeks. So we were sort of pitched last week in the top left corner around wholesale market review, and now we transition across to the right hand side, particularly that third word in the top right box there, load shape, which I'm sure most of our audience will be familiar with. And then that cascades down into all those behind the meter solutions or behind the meter physical solutions that you're right across, and our engineering team is right across, obviously Nat. So those are it's the right hand side that we'll be focusing on today, which is hopefully a nice transition from last week. I'll launch the first poll question. Hopefully that sets us up nicely for the discussion today. It's really around whether or not your business shifts its consumption from on-peak times or on-peak hours, and we've listed that as high price, and off-peak, from high prices to low prices, or on-peak to off-peak. And that second word there in brackets, high price to low price, is an interesting one, and we'll sort of take a look at that in more detail in the discussion today, particularly because as the market transitions, what was once a peak is no longer quite a significant peak for price, as we talked about last week. So we'll just give everyone a moment now for this to roll in. If you're sort of not aware of it or across it from your own business, I suppose we'll ask, even in your residential at home, as everyone's home has become their place of business, or for many people that's been the case over the last month or two. Have you thought about the time at which you stick the dishwasher on or the washing machine and try to optimize that away from your peak tariff and onto your off-peak tariff?
Yeah. So Aidan, just I guess in principle, what would be the typical times where your peak and off-peak hours would generally occur?
Yeah, we're obviously, you and I are physically based in Melbourne, so the Victorian tariffs are typically 7 to 10 or 7 to 11, so that's 7 a.m. in the morning up to 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. at night. Network tariffs differ very slightly from retail tariffs, and across different regions or different states of the NEM as well. You've got a shoulder in New South Wales, so often the rate for the shoulder is just the same as the peak. So there are a couple of buckets, but typically 7 to 10 or 7 to 11 will cover it in most regions.
Yep. Okay. Cool. So
let's take a look.
Okay.
There you go, a bit of a mix, but by and large of the respondents we got, over 50% saying no load shifting. So that would say, I'd say, Nats, your eyes light up there as head of engineering. That's a, this is an audience that has an opportunity to talk about some of the more sophisticated retail products available, and how you as a consumer, or our audience as consumers, have opportunity to be doing some smarter things with their consumption.
Yeah, and I think in terms of what we see there, those numbers aren't surprising. There's definitely, in terms of how the energy management industry, as well as how people connect and understand their energy use, isn't necessarily associated around time of use, and it's not often that people would look towards their businesses and operations to understand how to shift operations, or how to shift their own energy use at their home to times where it's cheaper. But I guess without thinking like that, there is a lot of money being left on the table, or a lot of savings being left on the table. And I suppose part of this discussion today will be to unpack some of those concepts, some of those mechanics, and also connect it through to some of the trends that's happening across the industry with renewables, what impact they're making, demand response, energy management, etc. So we're really keen to get into it, and yeah, so maybe now's a good time, Aidan, to maybe just provide us with a quick overview of some of the mechanics on what we call our PEA, which is our price efficiency adjustment number.
Yeah, so this slide will be about as deep as the maths goes. So I hope you'll indulge us just a little bit of the boring stuff and the mechanics in the background, but it's key to sort of the broad story, and key to our retail products. It's really key to every retail product. If we're speaking candidly, the a couple of key parts to your retail bill are obviously your volume. If you can consume less volume, you're going to be paying less as a general rule. But then also the time at which you consume. And so the time at which you consume is really around how you consume throughout a day relative to the wholesale price in the background. Now, you as a standard retail customer, you probably don't see, your prices change, your retail prices change as they link to the wholesale market, but your retailer does settle your costs through the wholesale market through to AMO based on the time at which you consume. And so that's what we commonly called a load shape factor, load shape premium, and that's really around how you or your business consumes relative to the prevailing wholesale market. We've got a couple of examples here on this slide. The orange line dictates a customer's usage pattern, and the green line denotes the spot price across a day, so 0 to 24 hours across the bottom axes for 3 different customers. And so on the left-hand side, it would be an industrial or a manufacturing style customer that runs one shift, maybe 1.5 shifts for the day. And you can see that ramp up in the early morning. It's about a 6 a.m. ramp up, fairly consistent usage throughout the day, and then winding down at around 10 p.m. And you can see how that shape looks against the prevailing spot price. The spot price obviously relatively low overnight. It picks up in the morning. It falls throughout the middle of the day, particularly if you remember the discussion last week that we were talking about April's price evolution and some of the reasons why that daytime price is cheaper, and then into the afternoon evening shoulder, price spikes and then falls away. The next case would be a manufacturer, and then the last case on the right-hand side, business C there, is a manufacturer with on the roof behind the meter solar. Now, our price efficiency adjustment, or PEA, hopefully we don't confuse too much with acronyms through this presentation, but it's a really simple calculation, and it is the load-weighted spot price as per your consumption profile minus the time-weighted spot. So the time-weighted spot is quite simply the average spot price in that given month. We bill at a monthly frequency, so it's just the arithmetic average of each of those 30-minute spot prices throughout a month. So in April, with very low spot prices, we were looking at something in the $40 a megawatt hours or 4 cents a kilowatt hour range across NEM regions based on that discussion last week. That load-weighted spot, if we think about how your business consumes, if you're consuming at the higher price times of the day on average or typically, your load-weighted average spot is going to be above that time-weighted average. And as a result, LWA spot minus TWA spot will be a positive number. The reverse is true. If your business consumes typically during the lower price times of the day, if you're a very heavy overnight consumer, or you really take advantage of those cheap daytime prices that we're seeing in the market at the moment, your load-weighted average spot price might actually be below the average spot price, and that's something that I suppose you see really sophisticated consumers being able to do, Nathaniel. And then through that formula, the PEA becomes a negative, and that would be a subtraction from your rate. So this is a fairly common concept in terms of the load shape, but here at Flow Power, what we do is we make it really transparent. We show you what that was in any given month. We apply it retrospectively to your invoice, depending on what product you're on, and really connect our customers with the wholesale price so that they are incentivized to change behavior and can take advantage of demand management and demand response opportunities.
So Aidan, thank you for that. I know that wasn't easy to introduce in quickly and simply. So if we summarize, essentially the PEA number that we work with, in terms of key principles, if you're consuming at a time where demand is high on the grid, then the load-weighted average on that price will be higher, so that PEA number will be high. And if you're consuming at a time where generation and the supply of energy is ample and the demand is low, then that PEA number will be negative, which will ultimately reduce your bill and actually provide a cost saving there. And so I guess from our perspective, and like Aidan was referring to, these are mechanics of a retail product that typically in a fixed peak off peak rate is embedded within the retailer's product. And so the end user doesn't have the visibility, nor do they see how their energy use is impacting on that number. And what Aidan is referring to is we simply, through the retail product, we are exposing this to the customer, where the idea is that we will regularly work with the customer to understand what this is, with the view of increasing consumption at times where supply is ample. And yes, that word is right. In an energy management strategy, it does make sense to increase consumption at certain parts of the day, at certain parts of the year, with the view that you could reduce consumption at times when prices are expensive. And the net benefit of all that means that you are able to reduce your costs when you start to balance that all out. It can be a bit more complex, and when you look at the poll that we just released a moment ago, we're talking 25% don't know, 57% don't really look into that, and then there's a remaining portion there that do load shift. And so these concepts are quite new, but the difference here is, guys, is that that those on the left side of the screen there, businesses that operate their energy use in accordance with your typical daily profile of 9 a.m. start, 6 to 9 p.m. finish. Those types of customers typically aren't aware of these types of opportunities. And so they're usually leaving money on the table, as we mentioned earlier. Those flat-lined ones, as per the middle there, where a manufacturer or a data center, a cold storage facility, those ones where they have a reasonably flat load, their PEAs are quite static. And so there's usually a series of things that those types of customers can do to try and identify ways to be a bit more flexible. And usually the ones that are a bit more sophisticated, the ones that have implemented flexibility within their operation, they're usually in business C, where they can start to have a direct inverse of their usage compared to the spot price. And that's those that are actually getting month-on-month benefits in terms of being able to actually reduce their monthly bill by optimizing their PEA. Aidan, we might jump into the next screen because I'm interested. If we look at it from a customer's perspective, there is that, obviously there's a variability on the market, and ultimately the customer only really has control over their energy use and what retail product they sign up to. So can you give the audience maybe just an overview of what does that variability actually mean, and is that extreme, is that reasonable, like in the context of how it operates on the market? Yeah, just give them a quick overview.
Yeah, absolutely great question. So I suppose under a standard retail deal, this is something that's buried, it's fixed, it's bundled, and the retailer absorbs the overs and the unders on this and makes some attempt to predict it. In the flow power world, we connect customers to their real load shape factor or their real price efficiency adjustment. And so a natural question would be, well, what does that look like? And how does that change naturally through time as the market changes? So this is our Queensland portfolio shown here up on screen for the last 12 months. So from April 19 through to March 20 at an individual monthly level. The box plots represent our 25th percentile up to our 75th percentile. So about half of the customers in the range, so there's 25% that sit above and 25% that sit below those ranges. But essentially, this captures the bulk of our customer base. And so you can see a couple of things, I suppose, in that the other thing to point out being that 0 on the left-hand side is a very stable load, like Nathaniel said on the previous slide. It's a manufacturing load. It's close to average. That would be where the load-weighted average is very similar to the time-weighted average, and so that there's no additional cost associated with that shape. The PEA equals 0. And then there's the positive PEAs to the upper end of that, and then negative PEAs where we've seen customers take advantage of the lower times prices of the day or of the month. And so a couple of things to point out: that our median outcome, the point at which we go from the orange to the green boxes here, is relatively stable, and on average throughout a year probably sits at around plus $1 a megawatt hour or plus 0.1 cents a kilowatt hour. Pretty minor in the scheme of a retail bill. If you think about what your business might be paying, we're talking about that your shape is worth about 0.1 cent. And you can see the variability there between the high and the low throughout those 12 months as probably around 0.2 to 0.4 in terms of those movements. So not entirely relatively stable, relatively small in absolute terms, and I would say quite manageable from an overall cost perspective. The other thing is that we see is a bit of seasonality in here, which is really interesting. And I specifically chose Queensland from a portfolio perspective because this is one of the regions where we've seen the onset and the impact of renewables have the greatest impact on the shape of the spot curve and arguably the absolute level of the spot curve as well. Plenty of drivers in Queensland, generator behaviour, all those sorts of things, arguably as well influencing prices. But you also see that this is one of the regions where we see the early onset of the duck curve, particularly through late 2019. And so what you actually see here is that our customer base essentially starts to see negative PEAs during that winter period. And slightly positive PEAs typically during the Q4 and the Q1 period. So it's a really interesting seasonal shift to see.
Yeah. So Aidan, that middle line, actually, I just noticed that's a September 19. Is that September or is that June? Just wanted to double check on that.
September. So we're running the most recent 12 months backwards from the right-hand side.
Yep. Cool. So tell us a little bit around how, like, what were some of the mechanics around a chunk of those customers getting a negative 6 PEA, negative 0.6 PEA?
Yeah, so essentially their invoice would have seen minus 0.6 cents a kilowatt hour added to their rate during the month of September, and that would have been because they were typically consuming during the lower price times of the day relative to average. And really, like I was alluding to earlier, this is about the time we really started to see those cheap daytime prices. We saw a number of instances of negative prices. I know we have a number of developers, project developers who are joining the series. And so anyone who's owning assets or operating assets, and any of those in Queensland would have known that this was about the time we started to see those instances of negative pricing, of very low daytime pricing. That obviously started to bring about a bit of behaviour change, a bit of rebidding, and we are seeing third parties out there help project owners and project operators try and avoid and try to get off sun and try to stop generating during those really low price times. But this was one of the months, one of these transfer, I suppose, middle months where we started to see that transition, and we saw a lot of volatility, but it was to the downside, unlike the typical summers that we see. And so our customers here who would have been consuming during the middle of the day essentially would have been consuming when the wholesale price was low or negative.
And that would have been an ample supply of energy being injected at that time, right?
Exactly right. So that translated through to a discount in their price essentially. Now, this, I suppose, Queensland has moved first. Arguably, South Australia is heading in the same direction. New South Wales and Victoria, deeper markets, but it is expected that we will start to see more of the duck curve present as more renewables come in, and that really is going to be a great opportunity for consumers, particularly during those winter months when overall demand is a little bit lower, that the impact of solar may start to eat out that daytime price. Arguably it'll happen in Q4 and Q1 as well. All that remains to be seen and to be played out, but that spells opportunity through a PEA, which can be low or even negative, and pass on savings to you, the customer.
Yeah, so then if we were to have a look at what happened this summer and so there's obviously a contrast there where those negatives, it's purely a positive number there. So can we provide some background context as to what happened on the market to result in a 0.1 to roughly 0.6 positive PEA?
Yeah, so that would have been a little bit of volatility in the other direction. Queensland.
Yep. Oops, I think we may have lost Aidan just for a moment there. But I think what Aidan would have referred to is Queensland probably wasn't as volatile as maybe some of the other states across, particularly this year being New South Wales and Victoria, seeing some volatility there this year. Sorry, Aidan, you back?
I think I'm back.
Yes.
Yeah, slightly different volatility in Queensland relative to Victoria. A couple of price spikes, but then that natural volatility during summer, if it does happen when people are consuming, that will potentially drag the PA numbers slightly higher. So that seasonal shape is not unsurprising that it might be slightly higher in summer, subject to customers' behaviour and ability to load shed and avoid those high price periods, and slightly lower during winter if they're a daytime consumer and daytime prices are very suppressed.
Yeah. So guys, just to connect this back to where we were earlier, if we look at the PEA and it's positive, the months where that presents as a positive number, there are tools such as demand response that is a bit more common in the summer periods that can be applied to reduce the the monthly PEA that you are seeing in June and even in June, in January 20 and even in June 19. And so demand response during those moments where the market may have spiked momentarily for a handful of times, that would have contributed to the PEA being standing out like that. And so being able to implement DR would have reduced that overall PEA to some extent. Now, would it have made a dramatic difference where it would have turned it into a negative number? Possibly not, but it would have obviously been able to shave the top off, by being able to take out some of those serious events during those certain periods of time. And similarly with the PEA in the September period, and then probably even more so as we start to see over the coming years in winter, where demand may be high and the supply and generation might be high, but demand might be a bit lower. That will ultimately lead to a few negative events where there might be negative pricing because there is an oversupply of energy. Now, during those moments, if you do operate a solar farm or if you do have behind the meter generation within your sites, it is those moments where you want to try to scale that down a little bit and increase your energy use, and top up your storage, charge your batteries, fill up your dams, reduce the temperatures of your chillers, those types of things to give you that flexibility where you can consume more energy during those moments and potentially get paid for it, but then give you some flexibility to utilize that energy stored over times where the price will ultimately come back up again. And so it is a very dynamic space, and yes, it may not necessarily be for everyone out there, but these are the tools that we are trying to make available out to the general market, as opposed to having this metric just embedded into your retail product and not necessarily receiving the signals on how you can utilize it.
Yeah, absolutely, Nathaniel. It is dynamic. The market is changing. The opportunities, we are sort of assisting customers to take advantage of those opportunities as they are presenting, and so we see plenty of this in future. But as you say, as storage takes place, as people's behaviour changes, as they consume more during the middle of the day and take advantage of that solar-led duck curve, that may start to stabilise the daytime price and so forth. So other times of the day may longer term could become cheaper.
True, absolutely. Okay, so we'll jump into the next slide. Let's see what that is. Okay. All right. So guys, with this one, again, we just wanted to reiterate that the PEA is not a new term or a new tool that we are introducing that is supplementary to a retail product. This metric is essentially embedded into all retail products, and all we are simply doing is exposing this so then we can provide a direct signal to the customer and provide them with the ability to adjust their energy use with the ultimate goal of reducing their cost over time. Now, ultimately, the reason why this is being a core component, not only for Flow Power as a retailer, but Flow Power as an energy management company, having this signal allows the customer to really utilize all of the available tools out there to adjust their energy use accordingly. And so when you look at solar and being able to control solar, whether it's generating throughout most times of the year, but also controlling that to reduce its output and ramp that down during negative times, or whether it's controlling your energy use, implementing batteries, demand response, etc. All these things become a lot more valuable when you have a mechanism such as a PEA to help you drive your energy costs month on month and reduce your costs over time. And so, so I guess we just wanted to make that contrast with regards to fixed peak and off-peak rates, because without these signals, the market is not aware of how it's managing its energy use in the context of the market and in the context of the grid. And so we see this as being a crucial part in being able to incentivize the market, but also improve the stability on the grid, and also which will also ultimately lead to more renewables and a cleaner energy supply.
Yeah, I think great summary, Nathaniel. Hopefully that chart hits home the suppose the inefficiencies or the how outdated a typical peak and off-peak tariff is relative to what's happening in the wholesale market today.
Yep. So so we might just flick over to questions here, and okay, so we've got a few small questions here, but I guess in terms of so Aidan, just from your perspective, in terms of the PEA and what might be some of the barriers that you're seeing in terms of how users can adopt or understand how this applies to their business. I've certainly got some views around this. Have you come across any experiences today as to what are the typical trends or responses around PEA?
Yeah, so I suppose where you're seeing consumers come off a long-term fixed deal, peak and off-peak rate, fairly typical product, there are more moving parts when you do introduce a price efficiency adjustment. And so I suppose you have to have someone who's willing to learn, and someone who wants to be a little bit more innovative to come on the journey. So sort of an open mind is probably required. But then I suppose once that bridge is crossed, I mean, then you as an engineer, your team's eyes light up surely, because you can go on site to a customer, even you could probably see it at a desktop study level in just the data, the number of opportunities there would be. So I think once you get someone willing to understand it, the true dollar savings that you guys can apply through very simple measures sort of help win a customer for life, I would say. But tell us a bit about that.
And I think so. You've hit the nail on the head, because there is that initial barrier there to I can't do anything. The way we conduct our business is the most important. We have to produce widgets. We got to stick to these timetables, etc. And you're right. There is that initial mental barrier, which a lot of the time as well includes multiple stakeholders having input. And their KPIs are somewhat connected to that output. But you're right, we do find that across most, maybe not all, but across most operations, there is a level of flexibility there that can be explored or implemented and ultimately valued as to what would be the commercial benefit in terms of savings or reduced exposure, or etc. That may be the benefit of that. And I think it's not a single approach to these things, and it usually requires a bit more of an open, like you say, an open mind. But the benefits are significant when you can apply this across your individual site or potentially across your portfolio. You know, there are some great examples out there that we would be happy to present those and bring them on the spot, willing that we can get the right person to talk about their operations. Yep.
Yeah, so that probably dovetails
So
into one of the questions that I'll fire at you, Nathaniel, because your team manages it. So how do we communicate the PEA to clients, and how do we tell them about a particular or a potential price event, and either to the upside or the downside? You want to talk us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So there's usually three key areas at the moment that are of importance. We've spoken about demand response, and DR is one that all, if not most of our customers are heavily engaged in. That one's a bit more traditional, whereby we can anticipate and forecast an event occurring within a reasonable time frame and inform our customers that this is likely to occur. The other one, which is probably leading to the PEA, is dynamic demand management. And this is where we're actively looking for opportunities to shift incremental parts of their loads with the ultimate view of removing a chunk of energy use from one time slot to another. And a lot of the time, again, it's usually confronted with a little bit of resistance, a little bit of a hesitation to unpack that and understand what it really means. But it's usually the savings that's the initial driver that will get everyone's attention and say, oh, wow, there's a 20% saving. You know, if we do this every day, if we shift this operation and shift that amount of energy use across that part of the day from this time to that time, there's a 20% saving at the end of the year if we're able to implement that day in, day out. And that's when the discussion starts to build up a little bit more substance, starts to get a little bit more detail, because now that there's an end goal in mind, where if we shift that much kilowatt hours from X hours to those hours, there's an outcome at the end of that. Now, the market does change. And so, yes, there needs to be some monitoring around that. But again, having that flexibility and having the right stakeholders in place to be able to enable those types of shifts can yield those types of savings. And so that's where, that's the second part in terms of that dynamic demand management that could really have a positive impact on your PEA and turn that into a negative number. And then the last one there, which is also connected to all this, is solar. Now, it's only been more recently in the last few months where negative pricing is becoming more prevalent across the market, and where there's a massive solar injection into the grid. And so, so we are looking at tools there to enable the automation of ramping down the solar output, so you're not having to pay for generating at those times of the day. And that's just as important as well to being able to shift or reduce your demand in support of the grid. And so, because ultimately you don't want to be generating into a grid that's putting it under more stress when it's got an oversupply of energy. So again, that third element there, we look to work with our customers to implement automated controls, preempt a time where a negative price event will occur, and then avoid having to pay during those moments. So they're the three key areas at the moment that that's probably the core focus of this PEA in terms of, or the core influences to this PEA. And I think over time, once the market, or once our customers and once the market becomes a bit more attuned to how the PEA operates and what influence they can make on that, yeah, we're really keen to see how the energy maturity levels start to increase.
Yeah, absolutely. Take customers along the curve. There's a question here coming from actually an old colleague of mine, Chris, who I've seen has been dialing in the last couple of weeks. So thank you for your contributions and your continued attendance. And he's asking the question around, so indicatively the price efficiency adjustment based on the numbers we put up for Queensland is approximately 10% of the total spot price. And so sort of breaking down the commodity cost, I suppose, he's sort of paraphrasing a little bit here, talking about 90% is the absolute price and about 10% the shape. And I certainly agree that that's a fairly good indicative proxy for the breakdown between market cost, the average cost, and then the customer specific shape over the top. And he's asked the question around how do we help customers manage that 90%? You know, we're talking a lot about demand response and demand management that's influencing that PEA and true savings that can be had there. But in the event that underlying market goes to $10,000 or $14,000, what tools do we have at our disposal to manage that average price? And that's a really good question, because we've got multiple retail products here at Flow Power. One is customers who are on who are 100% exposed to the pool and or to the wholesale price, the 5-minute market averaged across every 30 minutes. But we've got another product called Power Active, where essentially the customers would be fixing that average price and fixing that 90% chunk of their costs. It's essentially we lock in, we index that chunk, that 90%, to the ASX price and pass through the customer's price efficiency adjustment based on actuals. So they're still incentivized to do all the demand response and the load management and all the good stuff that the engineering team can support them on. But that large chunk that makes up that 90% is fixed, and so they're less exposed to the variability there. They still get bang for their buck from the demand response because it still applies to a similar average price, but that average price is just known and locked in advance. So we do have multiple retail products for customers who, like Chris alludes to, may not want to be exposed to the wholesale price the entire time. We can build a product there that does, I suppose, involve a hedge.
Yeah, and that's a good it's a good connection to that quadrant at the start, in terms of not only what's happening behind the meter and the front of the meter, but also what can we do at a physical level, hence the engineering level, but then also what can we do at the commercial level, the finance level, which touches on, you know, the retail products, the structure, the PEA, and all those things. So hopefully these things are starting to come together. You know, we've been talking now for about 5 weeks, and we're starting to touch on those various quadrants. But yeah, we can probably go very deep into each of those quadrants quite a fair bit. But hopefully through the themes of these sessions, those quadrants are starting to take shape, and we can start to see that this is a multi-dimensional strategy that can be implemented here. Yeah. Okay, so guys, it's just about to hit 2:45. Again, thank you very much for your attendance. It's been it's really been a pleasure to continue these sessions week in, week out, and we really appreciate that everyone's been able to take time out of their day every week to attend these sessions and listen to Aidan and I. Next week, I believe we'll be covering LGCs. Is that right, Aidan?
Yeah, I think so. Yep, the LGC market.
Yep. So we'll send some details around that over the coming days. But yeah, thank you for your time, and I think we'll close it out here.
Thanks, Nat.
Oh,
thanks everyone for joining.
Sorry. One more thing, Laura. Thank you, Laura. You just corrected me. Green claims. So yes. So for those who are looking to publicly announce anything around sustainability credentials and credits, and claiming their 100% carbon neutrality, that's all we'll be covering next week. So thank you, Laura. Geez, nothing would happen without her. All right, we'll close it here. Cheers, guys.
Thanks.